Do what thou will be the whole piece of law.
I think we can all agree that fascism is bad. Thank you for the applause. Thank you. I know I love accepting this award, but I have things to do. I mean, despite the fact that I can buy it on Amazon. I always thought the auto-generated ads were a little weird. But you may ask today, why? Why am I talking about fascism? Well, I want to find the humor in it, and more specifically, the American version, because the European versions have already been treaded on so many times and copied. They're all just so bland. They all have the same flavor, you know? Petain, boring. Balbo, copycat. Franco, people just forgot about him until everything just returned to normal after he died. Everyone finally let all their breath go and said, can we just return to a democracy like we used to? And everyone said, yeah, I figured that's what was going to happen because he didn't really care about hanging on to power. And the reason why the American version is so unique is because they'll be huffing the gas fumes out of whatever floats across over from Europe and then infusing it with their own twists and turns, the 100% Americanism thrown into the mix. And most of the time they just disappear because of federal action or power struggles or both. But sometimes they just stay in that nice little uncomfortable zone of being just threatening enough to scare people, but not threatening enough to do anything more than stand there and get accused of being feds and infiltrated and then eventually turn into a wisp of gas on the wind and disappear. So today, I'm going everywhere from its protogenic beginnings, from its pseudo-fascist roots before that was even a name, to its evolution into the modern day and what to watch out for. And I think the most important part in all of this is don't forget to laugh. A lot of this is gonna get pretty heavy, but I'm gonna try and keep it light. It's like an angel food cake. You can't let it compress on you. So I want to start off with a definition of terms. When I say fascist, what do I mean? Well, basically, I'm going to go with the age-old ism and warp it a little bit. A fascist is anyone who believes themselves to be fascist. So in this video, you won't see some just general hate groups. They won't be in here. But anything else in the Americas that has vaguely touted itself as a fascist organization, you will most likely see. And I'm telling you, a lot of them are not as ironclad as they look. It's really funny to poke at them, especially when they're just effectively in a little museum that we can all look and gawk at of how funny they used to be. So keep my advisory in mind, and just as a verbal condemnation, I don't support any of these groups. I'm not a member of any of these groups. I'm here to keep them in a little cage and shake them, and we can laugh when they do funny things. So I want to start off with something that you know well, but not too well. Imagine it's back in the early 1900s. A quiet chill falls over a quiet den in rural Georgia. A Turk escorts you into a room where a cyclops and a magi and a monk are looking over your documents. You look around. Some ghouls stand in the corners of the room. A nighthawk sits outside the window. And they all start asking these uncomfortable questions like, have you ever served in a union? Or, do you believe in equality? This is the worst D&D session ever. No, I'm just kidding. It's a clan meeting. And this is what your signing up would look like. And that's just on a small level. As you go higher, you get these weirder titles. You get giants attended by goblins, titans attended by furies, and dragons attended by squires, and a wizard attended by some guy named a Schloobladen or something. Schloobladen, whatever. That's their treasurer, in case you were out of the loop. And back in ye old 1900s, the clan were a force to be reckoned with. They would really suppress anyone that they didn't like, and if they couldn't suppress you, they would just straight up kill you, regardless of how you looked. Race didn't matter. Surprisingly, being one of the poster childs for racist organizations when people think of them, they had a more, if you aren't with us, you're against us. And if you go against us, then we will just kill you. They would send coded messages and signs as warnings. So they do you the decency so you could skip town right before these yahoos could get to you. But of course, if you were in a leadership position, the yahoos could still get you. In fact, you'd be tried by a whole council of yahoos. And if you were just some normal undead clansman like a ghoul or a goblin, you'd just be tried by some centaurs instead. This is something Gary Gygax would shamelessly steal 70 years later in his hit game Dungeons and Dragons. After 1915, specifically Thanksgiving 1915, they would be reformed under a pastor named William Simmons. Simmons, not related to J.K. Simmons, so my favorite actor remains out of this. They decided that having their LARP was still important, so they kept all of the titles of wizards, dragons, furies, titans, and cyclopses. However, they would shamelessly steal the Roswellian mystique 32 years before it happened by claiming they had seen aliens. In fact, not everyone in the clan was deemed an alien, and they claimed to live in an alien world. I want to believe that there's aliens out there. When is the disclosure coming? The disclosure will come. I'm psychically pinging that disclosure will come one of these days. Ah, well. Specifically with this Reformation, the one thing that they wanted to change is that they felt like it was too LARPy. You know, running around the fields and tracking spell slots and breath weapon charges must be exhausting when you're wearing this bulky uniform that's 100% cotton and 90% humidity. And they wanted to protect their copyrights on the IP to make sure nobody stole it, so they had to add "Kla" to all of their titles when they went through this Reformation, like Batman. Well, except the Nighthawks, because as a punishment for their hubris, they would be turned into a magic card over 100 years later for their refusal to change the name. If you were trying to set up a nightmare rotation of some of the worst branded names that you would ever have to say at a meeting, it would have to look like this. Imagine, you're in a room. The Supreme Grand Wizard is off trying to achieve lichdom, so he's in the other room. The Clalif stands at the head of the table to set roll call. A Clud, not a Chud, but they're pretty close. A Clud is ready to provide spiritual guidance. A Clocard sits with a copy of the Cloran, ready to speak to a local Clabby, who counts the funds and runs the books. Now, a few Clarogo bring in the Clonsol, who arrived late for an allegedly Protestant organization. They have a lot of Middle Eastern and Islamic influences, but I didn't name these positions, so I can't be blamed for how terrible they sound, and the fact that if you were trying to refer to any of them outside of context, they would sound as if it were a bunch of Middle Eastern LARPers instead of a bunch of Protestants trying to pretend that they hate everyone in the world. But I'll spare you the rest of the clonvocation of these horrible names, and just tell you that onwards into the modern day, the clan really has seen a downturn in its effect on day-to-day life, having a few thousand scattered members living off fumes of past discrimination and LARPing with each other on weekends. They're not really going to be anyone who frightens you. In fact, they'll probably be laughed out of any room that they try and walk into that isn't 100% on the same page as them. But their influence cannot be denied back in this time. Also, in the early 1915 to 1920s, that is an offshoot of the clan after its reformation, is a group called the Black Legion, where recruitment was a lot of the time involuntary, especially if you were a sports star. For some reason, they loved kidnapping baseball players, and a baseball star would also quit his job on allegations that he was a member of the Black Legion. He wasn't, by the way. They were just trying to find an opportune time to kidnap him so they could forcibly recruit him. They, most importantly to the future of the fascist movements in the United States, would run on a platform of 100% Americanism, which they don't really define very well, and I'm not going to define, because if they don't care, I sure don't. Basically, if I had to describe it, it's just anything un-American, and if you're an American, you hopefully know what that means just from the cultural zeitgeist. But for those of you who aren't Americans, I know I have a few people in Eastern Europe, so the best way I can generalize it is, if they don't like your race or religion or orientation, your union views, basically anything that doesn't go with the tenor of the time can usually be considered un-American. The judge of what is un-American is probably going to be some low IQ dude from the Midwest or the South, making that decision for you from behind a mask. Oh, and also the Legion disbanded after all of their leadership were imprisoned for various charges or died on weak health, so much for the superiority of the average Protestant white guy. Around this time in history, I'm just going to say that all originality goes out the window. I'm going to stop describing their ideas, as with the rise of European fascism, everyone after this will just be a copycat, as if everyone wasn't blending together already with the two organizations that we've discussed. And just to exemplify, here's a template going forward. The template will be a Christian anti-Semitic nationalist movement begins in the 30s with the stated goal of excluding Jewish people and non-whites from society. This group was diffused within 20 years due to the imprisonment of their leader, and they ceased to exist or retained such low membership numbers that they effectively ceased to exist. Which one am I talking about? Honestly, the Christian part should have tipped you off, because if you know your history, the rest will just swap out the Christian part in that summary for the worship of a certain German chancellor who was also the penultimate boss of Persona 2 Innocent Sin. I'm not lying, look it up, it's really funny. But back to the first of the many templates, the one that wanted to carry on the spirit of 100% Americanism and ride this new wave of fascism in Europe. With love, loyalty, and liberation comes the Silver Legion of America. Another thing you may notice about all the L's plastered all their uniforms is because they were going to take that many L's throughout their career as well, as they only ever achieved about 15,000 members, which will look like a massive movement about 20 minutes from now. But despite this massive upwelling of people, their leader, William Dudley Pelley, would run as a third-party candidate in a two-party system, of which he came ninth, behind all of the writing candidates by one solitary vote. So just remember, if you ever feel useless voting for a write-in, you can still probably cuck the fascist candidate out of getting anywhere above last. Oh, also, they only had about 10% voter turnout from their members, which I also think is extremely funny. You can get 15,000 people to sign up for a fascist organization, but you can't get more than 10% of them to vote. And we're assuming that all of those 1,500 voters are Silver Legion diehards, which I don't think is true. So, I mentioned his name before, but let's learn about who the leader of the Silver Legion really was. The chief, the Silver Revolutionary who would lead this new America from their world headquarters in the world-renowned city of Spokane, Washington, a man named William Dudley Pelley. Now, this man is very different than all the other men we've discussed before, because he has a name and is not a generic man behind a mask. If you couldn't tell by his face, he is a man of many esoteric powers. These powers include the power to astrally project, levitate, see through walls, the ability to cure physical ailments, and transcribe information from the souls in another dimension, even though, before this claim, he had claimed to go to multiple other dimensions devoid of souls, which, get your story together, even Francis E. Deck can keep it straight. And the Silver Legion decided that that's the guy you want running your movement, the guy who plays Dark Souls with Jews, communists, and Catholics. Anyway, he disbanded the Silver Legion after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. He also got charged with 12 counts of sedition, was convicted of 11 because the judge was incompetent in the last one, and he got 15 years in prison. However, he only served 8. I tried to astrally project to William Dudley Pelley for comment, but I couldn't get anything, so please forgive me, as he is no longer around. So, here's another little bit of a history lesson. During this time in the 1930s, there are a lot of political parties that want to make themselves useful to foreign governments. The Communist Party USA will have the USSR, and then you have to wonder, where's the German puppet party in America? Well, that would be a group with humble beginnings called the Free Society of Teutonia, led by a small group of German immigrants. Certainly this tiny detail will not be important later.
Sometimes foreshadowing is relatively obvious.
Which it went through a few name changes over the years. They got official letters of recognition from the German government, and they got official German approval in 1933 by a man empowered to do the job named Hans Spenknobel, and they merged with a bunch of other small fascist organizations to form the new Friends of New Germany, or more stupidly sounding, the FONG. However, their happiness wouldn't last, as the empowered Hans was not empowered enough to resist ICE, and he got deported in a leadership struggle. They would focus much of their time trying to contaminate any other unaffiliated German organizations. And when I say contaminate other unaffiliated German organizations, I really mean their members would tie themselves to other organizations and shout very loudly that they were all members of the FONG, which their goal was to try and drag more German immigrants into this Friends of New Germany organization. However, this popularity as being perceived as the German puppet organization in America during the 1930s got them a lot of attention, and this notoriety also got a very special House committee called the House Special Committee on Un-American Activities, which is actually what got the Silver Legion, which you could also count as friendly fire. However, the Germans across the sea shut down official support for it suddenly in 1935 and stole all its leaders away, as they said, you're more of a liability than an asset. However, quote-unquote, independently of the German government, the German-American Bund formed in Buffalo, New York, which would not cease any of the activities that got them noticed in the first place. However, the Bund was never officially endorsed, but it was basically endorsed by the German government, except when it wasn't. It was really only when they did something convenient that benefited them, they were all for it, but usually they tried to keep their distance and keep them at arm's length. But, of course, being an upstanding organization promoting German-American relations would be free of scandal, scandal, right?
Wrong!
It's tax fraud. The leader of the Bund, a man named Kuhn, embezzled money from the Bund, which they honestly didn't care about because they operated on the, well, he's the supreme leader of our organization, which means he can do no wrong, so they didn't really care. But of course, the US government did, and they were able to slap him in prison because all allegedly untouchable crime bosses are not immune to the IRS, which will be a running theme in this story. And during this prison sentence, he would then, as an extra slap on the wrist, have his citizenship revoked, and he would then be deported. His replacement, another German immigrant by the name of Gerhard Kunze, would flee to Mexico after encouraging draft dodging, which, being part of the largest war in human history, was really not a good time to be doing that. However, the Mexicans, on behalf of the American government, still captured him and imprisoned him for 15 years. And with the head cut off the snake of the German-American Bund, cleaning up the rest was very simple. Just take the modern administration stance. Just deport them. Anyone who didn't like it took their own way out. But getting back to 1936, I want to set up a side plot, as this happens about the same time. However, I didn't know where to put it. So let's sidetrack for a moment back to 1936. A man named Walter Kopp was expelled from the Bund as a political rival and decided to take a more hands-on approach to an American takeover. He went back to Germany somehow and got official approval to undertake a sabotage operation called Operation Pastorius under Abwehr II. He took a bunch of Bund members to Germany, gave them super intensive, super secret training to sabotage American industry, things like the Niagara Falls hydroelectric plant, aluminum plants, chemical plants, all of the internals of the American war machine. They were given explosives, primers, forged documents, and money, and they were brought over by submarine, only to be discovered within 30 minutes, offer the guy who found them a bribe to not tell them, shortchange the guy on the bribe, and then the guy told his superiors anyway. And two of the saboteurs, men by the name of George Dash and Ernst Berger, yes, that's his real American name, of course. If I wanted to lead a sabotage mission into America, I'd pick the name Ernest Berger. But contrary to his amazingly American name, he sold out the entire operation. And both of these men were never credited by the FBI, but despite getting lip service, they got actual service by not being sentenced to death with the rest of the saboteurs, and they only had to rot in prison for the rest of their lives, which I'd say is a pretty good deal. But after this, we all know the story. Fascism falls in Europe and the Allies win. But where does that leave the story of American fascism? Well, from the ashes left over from the German-American Bund, a new organization emerges from a former Navy man called the ANP, and it stands for the exact thing you think it does. But I don't want to focus on the ANP as an organization, because it's your bog standard organization with really generic beliefs. So remember that template from earlier? Consult it, and that's exactly what it is. Except replace the Christianity with worship of Persona 2's penultimate boss. The man I want to talk about, it's been a long time coming because I remember you, dear viewer, who suggested this about 8 months ago, that you wanted to see this, so here it is, kind of embedded in this video. The man I want to talk about is named George Lincoln Rockwell, aka Link, which has permanently ruined The Legend of Zelda for me forever, by the way. A man seeking fatherly approval, went to college, and would major in philosophy, writing a paper so bad that it almost got him expelled from Brown. He also fought in World War II, serving in the Navy on the USS Wasp, no less. And while serving in the Navy, he would meet a woman with whom he would court by the name of Judith Altman, marrying her in April of 1943. While he was deployed to Iceland, he met a woman named Thora Hallgrimsson, who was allegedly so beautiful that he divorced his wife immediately and married her instead. And in case you're wondering, no, Judith Altman would never see a penny of her child support. So the jokes write themselves, honestly. What can any American do about feeling alienated from the political establishment other than protest? And the spirit of protest shouted deeply from within Rockwell, as he would help many people found other like-minded parties in protest of the system, and he would lead protests against Operation Blue Bat in front of the White House, and he protested so much that he had to repeat his senior year of high school at a different school because he protested his teacher's teaching techniques. While in the Navy, he would found the World Union of Free Enterprise National Socialists, which he used as a networking opportunity to go talk to a bunch of other National Socialists outside of the country. However, it would eventually evolve into the ANP that everyone knows and despises. And after an epiphany reading some famous Persona 2 literature, his brother became very concerned for him and believed that Link had suffered extreme psychic stress during his service in the Navy, and he offered to pay for Link to go to therapy. However, he refused, saying that therapy wouldn't diffuse the global conspiracy against him. And of course, his brother did the massive facepalm and walked away, as this would be the last discussion they ever had together. If you think it gets better for Rockwell at this point, it doesn't. His ideology would begin to cost him, as with this party's founding, he would become one of the most prominent faces of fascism in America. And remember how I said that 15,000 was quite a large amount? Well, after this point, the ANP would be the largest fascist organization in America with only 500 members. So get with the times if you thought that 15,000 was really small. His wife, of course, now finding out that her husband was one of the most prominent fascists in America, didn't like this and immediately left for Iceland. Now, you may think Rockwell, having divorced his previous wife basically on the spot when he met someone else who he liked, would take it well, but no, in fact, he sells everything he owns to take a trip to Iceland to beg for his wife to come back. She didn't, and he felt that his beliefs would be galvanized by this loss, as now he had nothing holding him back. If you want to consider an alternate timeline, his party members were quoted as saying that the party would have dissolved if his wife had taken him back on that day. Being a fascist doesn't prevent you from being a simp, I suppose. Having his beliefs galvanized, and having his beliefs getting him thrown out of the Navy, he would take the popular media strategy that you will see a lot of people taking nowadays of trying to piss everyone off. This was especially targeted at Jewish organizations. This included writing books, fighting people, both physically and through words, protest, and applying for permits that he was technically allowed to have, and ran for positions that he technically could run for. Now let's get more specific. He attempted to run for president in 1964 and got 212 write-in votes after he was kicked out of the official Democratic Party primary. He also ran for Virginia governor, getting 5,730 votes, which he sums up pretty well in a quote after the campaign. He says, quote, "With a budget of 15,000, with a total press blackout, and with a kosher conservative splitting the vote, I got 7,000 people to vote for a Nazi." End quote. He also did an interview with a VIN, which, if you know the term VIP, it is Rockwell taking issue with the fact that his interviewer was black. He did this interview for Playboy magazine, yes, that Playboy magazine. Even though he would be an outspoken critic of everything that Playboy stood for, he thought that the moral contradiction was more livable than not getting his name out there. And kind of a side grade to that, he was a guest speaker at many Black Power events, as both radical sides of the spectrum supported segregation. He also called a speaker named Elijah Muhammad the savior of the black man, and would write a heartfelt eulogy for Malcolm X after his assassination. Also, I think it's interesting to note, George Lincoln Rockwell, going to so many of these radical civil rights events, would be exposed to the term Black Power, which is used a lot nowadays, and he thought that he could come up with his own. So, being a fervent American fascist, came up with the term white power in response. So, if you ever hear that term, it's just Rockwell's legacy echoing through the ages like a bad smell. He would also run something that he self-proclaimed as the hate bus, where he originally wanted to road trip alone, but his party members wanted to come with him, and Rockwell basically viewed doing this as social martyrdom, where he would road trip around America protesting that anything a common red-blooded American would hate, communism and race mixing. However, despite his hatred of race mixing by some of his original party members' definition, most notably his secretary, Matt Cole, is exactly what he would begin to do. He welcomed a Greek man by the name of John Patler, trying to adopt the idea of a more inclusive, quote-unquote, American fascism, of white unity rather than Aryan unity, basically saying that fascism across the sea was wrong, and as long as you can look at your arm and say, yeah, that's white, you can get into the organization. However, as is the tendency in a lot of fascist organizations, there would be schisms over this. Rockwell knew that. So to try and avoid it, he told John Patler to make no noise and pretend that he didn't exist. And he went ahead with the name change to the National Socialist White People's Party to reflect the more inclusive narrative, which, reminder, they're not making this party inclusive as everyone can come in. They're just saying, hey, is your skin white? Are you not Jewish? All right, you can come in. So they still discriminate against all of the groups that you would expect them to discriminate against. They use all of the boilerplate discriminatory dialogue. The only way they're being more inclusive is just that they want more people to join their ranks. Quantity has a quality all its own, I suppose. Also, as a part of this inclusivity, Rockwell would eliminate references to the Germanic beginnings of the party. However, this would be regarded as a bad move when Patler made noise and let everyone know how much he existed when he deleted Rockwell outside of a laundromat when he exited to get bleach from his car, which is pretty ironic. I gotta whiten up my clothes, bang. However, since he was honorably discharged from the Navy despite being the most well-known racist in the Navy, he was given a military funeral with none of the iconography that he wanted. However, he was buried in a fascist uniform. And just to sum it up, there was a large protest led by Cole when they went in full iconography to the funeral and were prevented from being led into the cemetery unless they were to strip off all their iconography. However, they refused, which led to an hours-long standoff, and Cole secretly cremated Rockwell, so he didn't even get the privilege of being buried in uniform. Good riddance, I suppose. But I think the quote from the book Hate by William Schmaltz sums it up the best. It goes, quote, "Gone was the criterion of being Nordic or Aryan. Gone was the nativist anti-Catholic prejudice of the Ku Klux Klan. Now anyone white and non-Jewish could belong to a worldwide racist movement that had no internal racial or ethnic hierarchy." Now, looking at the recording and seeing this video is already long as is, and considering the fact that there are so many more micro-organizations before we get to the ones that actually require a bit more attention, this will be a rapid-fire list going from 1967 to the modern day, okay? So, here's the blitzkrieg. Cole inherited the ANP from Rockwell. Many former recruits couldn't support him because many of them called him gay. However, it was rebranded as the New Order after fully embracing Nordic supremacy. They moved to the Midwest and had less than 100 members. A man who was expelled from the ANP by Cole for smoking weed and enjoying underage girls was named Joseph Tomasi. He would found the National Socialist Liberation Front. What made them unique was they allowed you to smoke weed. Tomasi was assassinated and would be replaced by David Rust. Rust would then be replaced by John Harry Duffy, and Duffy would be replaced by Carl Hand. And Hand fractured with one of his lieutenants and would be arrested for attempted murder, leading to the fall of the National Socialist Liberation Front. The National Socialist movement splintered from this, choosing the most generic and least pretentious name possible, led by Robert Brannan, but would be replaced in 1983 by Clifford Harrington after multiple strokes, and he would step down in 1994 to make way for Jeff Schlopp. And Jeff would have a good run of participating in Unite the Right and becoming increasingly culturally irrelevant. The group is still active today, with Burt Kolche at the helm, taking over in 2019. Their most recent protest as of recording was attended by 5 people. Here's a bunch of tiny organizations in the 2000s with no particular order. The National Justice Party was formed in 2020 and dissolved in 2023. They were also mentioned in the Epstein files. Ironic. The American Identity Movement formed in 2016 and was dissolved in 2020 after all of their members were doxxed by Unicorn Riot from over 700,000 Discord messages. Vanguard America would be founded in 2015 and be the most famous for splintering the most despite being under 200 members and is currently dead in the water. The National Socialist Legion split from Vanguard America and is so tiny because it requires all their members to read theory. The Nationalist Front was founded in 2016 to unite the National Socialist Movement, Vanguard America, and the Traditionalist Workers' Party and some other southern-oriented organizations and infinitesimally small fascist orgs that don't even deserve a mention. Supposedly being united, they collapsed when the Traditional Workers' Party did. The Traditionalist Workers' Party, founded in 2013 and disbanded in 2018 after they were doxxed by Unicorn Riot again for being members of the Atomwaffen Division. Okay, so I know that wasn't an extensive list, and I know a lot of the prison organizations are missing, or some of the international organizations are missing, and some that I couldn't even tell if they were parody or not, like the Goyim Defense League. So why did I not include them? Because they aren't funny or crazy enough. A lot of these are just, hey, we live in prison and we're Nazis and we kill people who aren't Nazis. And that's not funny. That's just stuff you can see in any crime show. So, what are the ones you might see today and the ones you should probably know about? The big 2 that are active today, because you can very well see, quite deservedly, the era where you can have an organized fascist movement has long since been dead, in the public eye at least. The 2 active groups are the Atomwaffen Division and Patriot Front. There are 2 sides of the same coin. However, the common thread is a man named James Mason. He was one of those people who accused Matt Cole of being gay and followed the National Socialist movement through. And when the National Socialist movement started to go downhill, he founded a group that he called the Universal Order, based on the ideas of the Charles Manson. However, after being imprisoned for 2 counts of metaphorically being on the Epstein list, if you catch my drift, he would would lose all of his other connections and write books in prison, and go on to manage Kmart's afterward while he continued to write his books. Namely, he would write a book called Siege, a book that literally screams at you that one Kanye West song when you open it. This book would be the founding ideology for Atomwaffen in 2015. Now, the Atomwaffen division is a mysterious package, and being some of the most hardcore adaptive groups on the planet while still managing to be horrifyingly funny sometimes. They have adapted by decentralizing to the highest degree possible, with their modus operandi being to teach you how to do terrorism yourself. Despite all these quote-unquote successes and advantages, their American branch would still manage to be infiltrated and diffused by federal agents, which they would leave at the end of their favorite book, by the way. I don't think that's a great thing to celebrate about. Hey, here's how our organization fell into cultural obscurity. That's a great thing to put in your favorite book. They also nailed their founder for following their playbook to the T and still getting arrested and imprisoned for the rest of time. In case you're wondering, their founder got 20 years for attempting to sabotage an electrical substation. So, what's the group's goal? What do they fight for? What's their big end goal? Back in Rockwell's day, it was to get a fascist in the White House. But now, Atomwaffen on their side of the coin is working towards a nuclear cleansing of the entire world. And to achieve these goals, they do basically everything to get themselves caught and imprisoned, and they don't even look good in their mugshots, which means they still can't follow their own orders. And I think that's a perfect summary. A delusional band of criminals who can't follow orders with the ability to shitpost online. They only really ever had a core of 80 members because of their strict entry requirements, but they never whined about it, unlike the second active organization today. In case you're wondering, Patriot Front is the opposite side of the coin. It's the Atomwaffen division, but the unhappy mixture of trying to be legal and centralized. Patriot Front was founded by Thomas Rousseau in 2017, and after splitting from Vanguard America, as Thomas Rousseau was in Vanguard America in his teenage years, but then after the Unite the Right rally, he said, I don't really like the association you've got with all of these murderers. I'm gonna go found my own movement. Following in that vein, they want to focus on protests and signs and flyers, and they are so successful at this as they are responsible for over 80% of fascist propaganda in 2021 and on. They are most known for never showing their faces and being coordinated protesters and counter-protesters. They have also led to a bunch of accusations that they are all feds, because even when they're arrested, their faces still won't be shown to the public. However, they are currently sitting at around 200 active members and are struggling to get more due to the fitness requirements, which makes me think that they're all just a bunch of fat LARPers like the Klan back in the day. Rousseau would also get the classic maximum sentence for minor crime that fascists usually tend to get, as he was carrying a tiki torch at the Unite the Right rally and would get 5 years in prison for menacing with an incendiary device. However, the group stays intact even with their leader in prison because of their ability to remain anonymous, except when they can't because Unicorn Riot will dox them a bunch of times. I'm not saying Unicorn Riot is a hero of an organization, but I'm also saying that they should get better cybersecurity if they're going to try and run a fascist organization. And the fact that Rousseau is aware that many organizations will destroy themselves by violently lashing out and doing targeted crimes like Atomwaffen has given the group its longevity despite their increasing irrelevancy. They are by far the most active and eminent fascist group in the United States because there really is no legitimate reason to dismantle them if you are granting them the First Amendment freedoms that they want to dismantle. So you can see the modern dichotomy. You either choose the wrathful degenerate route where you may get the worst of the worst and get declared a terrorist organization and dissolve, or you can take the new Rockwell/Rousseau route, embracing the protest and peaceful action, using your First Amendment rights to destroy your First Amendment rights, focusing on existing in a world that wants your organization to peter out and will be frothing at the mouth for any reason to throw you in prison. Both of these routes suck because you chose a side clinging to a dying ideology, where a bunch of unimportant self-importance LARP and commit crimes in the name of the biggest losers in the world, managing Kmarts for a living. Thank you. If you made it this far, I want to personally thank you. This is a video that I've been looking at making for a while, but I've never really had the time, and the 2-week schedule has now given me a lot more time to script, so hopefully this this video comes off a lot better and I can keep people engaged. But I appreciate you sticking around. You know, it would really mean the world to me if we could like, comment, and subscribe. Do it for my ego. And subscribe to Laugh at Fascists. There you go. 1 like equals 1 laugh at fascist. I'm not good at this. Anyway, I don't know how to do ends, so... Oh, wait, yeah. If you made it this far and you're still gnashing at the video for me to mention Donald Trump or the MAGA movement, make your own. Thanks. Link it to me. I'll watch it. It'll be funny. Bye.